What's going on, guys? Hope this video finds you well. So I've been messing around with the Super Mario Galaxy games on the Dolphin emulator and trying to figure out a way to map them to an Xbox controller. Now, hypothetically, this could work with any controller with the same amount of buttons, but I'm using an Xbox One standard controller in particular. And so I was able to get most of the traditional controls mapped no problem. There's more than enough buttons for that, and there's not really a bunch of motion simulation stuff you have to deal with. However, there are a handful of levels in Galaxy and Galaxy 2 where you're surfing / flying and then rolling on top of a ball, which require tilt controls. And so when I Googled a way to map all of these different control schemes onto one controller, I only really came across one Reddit thread that's very overlooked. The template that was posted there was actually what I based my control scheme off of, although I did change a couple of things and add a couple of things as well. But before I show you the control scheme, I wanted to kind of show you how it works with my Xbox controller being displayed in the bottom left corner, as you can see there, because there are a couple of advanced control settings that I used that may be a little bit confusing if you're not used to using them. Of course, I'm using Phazon UI, which is a program that allows you to change the button prompts to whatever you have it mapped to. And I'll show you one trick when it comes to mapping that as well. And so as you can see here, the A and B buttons are mapped to RB and RT, although I've also had them mapped to A and B, just double bound, because why not? Those buttons weren't being used anyway. But there's a reason for that. So we'll continue here. The one thing with Phazon UI that I wish you could do is change specific prompts. So unfortunately, there isn't a way, as far as I know, to change the Wii remote symbol, which is normally there, to whatever button it's supposed to be. And so the way I have this mapped is that when you hold LB, it puts the pointer on the screen, and then you can move the right stick around as such. And that's the reason why we have the A button mapped to right trigger for ease of use here. And so once we get into the game, there's a couple of controls that I just want to go over real quick. So as you would expect, the crouch button for backflips and long jumps and ground pounds is mapped to left trigger. Of course, LB is for aiming, and then I have right bumper mapped to shooting. You can have this, you can tweak the pointer controls as far as sensitivity and all that kind of stuff, but for the most part, you don't need to be super precise unless you are specifically shooting star bits, which I don't typically do much in the regular levels, and it works fine for feeding hungry Lumas and all that kind of stuff too. Now, one thing I wanted to do, for reasons I'll explain in a bit, is I wanted to free up the D-pad. So Mario Galaxy doesn't have a completely free camera. It's you move it in increments, but I decided to map that to the right stick to kind of free up the D-pad for later. And what's cool is, even though I'm using this here, and then if I hold LB to aim, it's not moving the camera. So I'll show you how to do that in a sec. And then of course this for first person view. And then I've mapped shake to X and Y just because I had both of the buttons free, so it's not really a big deal. Start is here, select is here, as you would expect. And I think that's it as far as the traditional controls are concerned. So let's first dive into the surfing levels. So this is the first one you come across. I'm just going to show one example, and we'll go from there. It's pretty straightforward for the most part. The complicated part is really just how I mapped it and how it is displayed in the Dolphin settings. Now, unfortunately, Phazon can't change the way that certain tutorials would explain. So it does say aim at the screen. So like technically it is okay with this. However, it's not going to trigger the tilt because the right stick is mapped to camera or aim when you hold LB. However, what I did was I made it so if you hold down on the D-pad, it activates tilt controls for this particular level, or any levels like this. So this should function the same for the flying levels in Galaxy 2, because I think it is the same controls, like on traditional controller, right? And so now you hold right trigger and move the right stick left and right to control the manta ray. I keep wanting to call it a mantine, but it's not a Pokemon. But as you can see, it controls pretty smoothly here. No real issues or complaints or whatever. Perfect. And now let's before I show how I mapped this, let's check out the ball levels. It's a pretty similar, it's pretty similar to the surfing, just holding up on the D-pad instead. But I just want to show it off and show you that it works anyway. So we'll go to the Rolling Green Galaxy. And there's also no reason why you need to use this control scheme in particular, but I figured it would give some people some ideas and maybe allow for you to come up with your own template that you prefer. So let's just go through the tutorial here, just for simplicity's sake. So jump on the ball. So now hold up on the D-pad to simulate holding the Wii Remote upright, which I thought up on the D-pad just made a lot of sense for that. The original template I used the bumpers, but because I wanted the bumpers for aiming and shooting, I wanted to free up some additional buttons. So now you just simply use the right stick as you did with the surfing to move around. And then right trigger to jump. So another reason why right jump is mapped to right trigger. In most traditional levels, you can just use the A button if you want. But the way I have the shooting mapped, it's kind of tricky because you can't hold LB, aim with the right stick, and press the B button at the same time reliably. So having it mapped to one of the shoulder buttons just makes a hell of a lot of sense. All right, so let's take a look at the actual control scheme here. So you go into here, you want to make sure it's set to emulated Wii Remote, of course. Go to configure, and then here we have, let me just shrink this a little bit more so you can see it all. So as you can see, right trigger and A button for A, right shoulder and B button for B, start, select. And then of course for rumble, you want motor L and motor R, which is what you do is you right click on this, select this, click select, put the OR, I think it's an operator. So OR, which is this symbol here. And then you just select motor R, select, and then you're set. Upright Wii Remote is set to a toggle with pad N. And so if you're mapping any of these buttons with the advanced settings, if you hold the button, as you can see, it'll display that as such. Same thing with the control sticks. It'll show you which direction is being pushed. And so it's pretty easy to figure out what the terminology is. The D-pad configuration is a bit complicated. So the exclamation point is for not. And so the way I figured this out was you say, when you're not pressing shoulder L and not pressing either up or down on the control pad and you use right stick, it triggers the camera. So as you can see, it's going bold there, but if I hold L, it doesn't go bold. Same thing with holding up. And same thing with holding down. So there you go. Motion plus, I don't know if that's actually necessary, but it's activated anyway. Nunchuck attached, of course. So let's go to motion simulation. So the way to map the shake is to put the same button on all three X, Y, and Z, since you want it to shake as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so that it actually activates. And so I have this mapped to both X and Y. And so you have button Y or button X. Same thing mapped to all of them. And so when you do that, it triggers the shake. Doesn't matter which one you press, you can press both. Now for the pointer controls. One option with the pointer controls is you can have relative input, which is where, as you can see, the blue cursor is where I'm aiming, but the red cursor is where the cursor would actually be on the screen. Now that's one option, but I prefer the higher sensitivity and actually having to aim and hold where I'm aiming. You also don't have to hide the cursor at all times. I don't like it on screen unless I'm using it. And so I said, it's kind of a double negative kind of deal. So to hide it, because if you just set hide to shoulder L without the exclamation point, it would only hide it when you're holding it. I'm sure there's another alternative, but you could say hide it when you're not pressing shoulder L. And so when you are pressing shoulder L, it doesn't hide it. And then you can use the right stick to move it around. And so for simplicity, I did map the aiming to both holding shoulder L and each direction on the control stick, because otherwise it'll overlap with the camera control, right? Then for the tilt controls, it is simply up on the D-pad plus any right direction, or down on the D-pad, any right direction. Down on the D-pad is simply to just counteract the aiming with the shoulder button and then camera control with the regular right stick. So like I said, it's a bit complicated. You can tweak this around, remap certain things. Like you could simply type this out, which you don't have to type it out. I mean, I'll I can show you how to do this basically, like actually. So if I delete this, so it's shoulder L, select. And then if you don't feel like figuring out how to actually type this out, you just scroll through here on operators and then right stick up, which is this. And so there you go. Beautiful, works perfectly. So one tidbit I want to leave, actually, hold on. There's one thing I'm forgetting. Trigger to L, nunchuck control stick for left stick, right thumb for C. You don't really need C very often, but I figured I'd map it to the same stick that the camera is being used for, so whatever. You don't need nunchuck motion simulation at all for this game, so that's fine. And then this also is fine. So one tidbit that I would suggest, because Phazon requires you to have different control schemes for different games, I made a Galaxy Duology profile specifically for my use. But for Phazon's use, I simply did, I think it was this, don't need that. And then you can simply press save and it'll make a second profile that is exactly the same, right? So no problems there. Then when you go into Phazon, I'm not going to show you how to do that because it's pretty straightforward. Once you go into Phazon, you open it with PowerShell and you follow the prompts. When it asks which profile you want to select two separate profiles for Galaxy 1 and Galaxy 2. So having one made for Galaxy 1 and then having one made for Galaxy 2 as well is useful for that. But then once you generate the Phazon profiles, you don't need the base Galaxy 1 and Galaxy 2 things because you're gonna have to pick one input for a lot of these multi-inputs or complex inputs. And so if I load the Phazon one, as you can see, it changes a bunch of stuff. A and B are no longer double bound. D-pad controls are not as complex, but that's what I have Phazon changing the prompts to. And so as you can see, this was changed. And so you don't want to use the Phazon profile when you actually boot up the game. You want to use the Galaxy Duology or whatever you're going to call it profile so that it works as such. And so what you can actually do is if you go to the properties on the game, you go to the editor, you type this out. So controls to specify that this is a control setting, not like a graphics setting or whatever. Wiimote source 0 equals 0, which sets it to emulated Wii Remote. And then Wiimote profile 1 equals Galaxy Duology, which is the one that I was showing off. And then that way you can do the same thing, literally just copy and paste it into Galaxy 2, no issues. And so yeah, don't use the Phazon profiles for actually playing the game. That's simply for changing the texture files that overwrite the button prompts. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to this. It is a bit on the complicated side, but I wanted to make sure that I was being thorough. I'm sure there are other videos in this style that I could make, although I don't dabble with complicated control schemes like this very often. PrimeHack already has a built-in control scheme that you can tweak here and there, but the defaults are generally good. Leave a like and subscribe as always if you enjoyed, and I will catch you guys in the next video.